This year, over 500,000 people are going to die of cancer. That's an incidence just like one of the Twin Towers falling every day of the week, every week of the month, every month of the year. That's how many people die of cancer in the United States alone.
It's the biggest gut check.
My doctor turned gray when he saw my results.
It's like a storm hitting you out of the blue.
Hearing the words that your child has leukemia.
You can try to understand, but until you actually face it yourself, you don't know. You really don't know what it is like.
It's a lonely place.
And it's very hard to find families that have not been touched by cancer in one way or another.
All you can hope is that anything you do is helpful to people in some way.
We could have gone one of two ways, and we chose to be strong together.
I was diagnosed in 1982 with myelodysplasia, commonly called pre-leukemia.
The early days of transplantation were really both incredibly exhilarating and incredibly difficult.
When I came to the Hutch for treatment, I asked them, what are my odds? They said, well, we've done 9 with your disease. 8 are still alive.
We had very little knowledge about platelet transfusions, and many of us actually donated platelets for our patients because HLA typing was really only rudimentary at the time.
They had 60 beds working on nothing but transplantation. The other transplant centers in the country had 2 beds or 4 beds or 6 beds or 8 beds. And if you wanted the best, you go to the place that pioneered it.
To see people that have been cured because of insights which I've contributed to, my colleagues have contributed to, it is invaluable. There's no dollar value I can put on it.
I still keep in touch with 4 of the nurses today, and I was able to celebrate my 25th transplant anniversary with them last April.
Getting a letter from a patient who says, you probably don't remember me, but I was on the transplant service 20 years ago, and I just want you to know that I'm now 45, and I have my kids are graduating from high school, and none of this, I would not have lived to see any of this if it hadn't been for you. You get those notes, and you pause, and it's it's really very meaningful.
My name is Marta Diaz. I am from Puerto Rico, and I am the mother of Lisette Cardona.
They admitted me in the hospital. My family admitted me in the hospital. And they did more blood tests and everything. And a hematologist checked the blood tests. And she said, I'm seeing some weird cells. And they decided to do the bone marrow. And that's when they learned that I had leukemia.
So Lisette needed a bone marrow transplant. She has a form of leukemia that was very high risk. Not surprisingly, being of her ethnic minority background, there were no fully matched unrelated donors that were found.
I learned that the first and non-related transplant was here in Seattle at the Fred Hutchinson. I learned about Dr. Colleen Delaney and everything she was doing with double cords, cord expansion, and I brought it to the hospital, to the doctors, and I told them, I want to go there. I want my daughter to go there.
Bone marrow transplant, just like the way it is like getting a transplant from another person's bone marrow, a grown-up person. And cord blood transplant is actually from a baby's cord blood. It is stem cell or mother cells.
What this means for them is that they can get their transplant. The toxicities they have with the transplant are far less, and instead of taking 1 month for their white blood cell count to return and to be less at risk for dying from infectious complications, we've been able to cut that time in half. So some of these patients have actually engrafted, meaning their white cell comes back before 10 days.
I always think I'm 21 years old and I'm going through this, but there's kids who are only 2 years old and they still go on with that, and I am like, hey, I'm older than them. If they can do it, I can definitely do it too.
Honestly, I think the only things that probably beat helping patients are probably the birth of your children and maybe marriage. So meeting Lizette was wonderful, and I tend to form bonds with these patients that I maintain over time. So she knows that she needs to stay in touch with me after she goes home.
I have the best opinion you can ever get for Dr. Delaney. I already feel her like part of my family. She saved my daughter.
My sister, Karina, was my best friend, my very best friend. We were always close growing up, and I don't know, being so close in age, we were only 2.5 years apart. We did everything together. When my sister got sick, we could have gone one of two ways, and we chose to be strong together and to be a support system for each other.
As a mother, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, do you think any of our kids have the same bone marrow? That would be a miracle, because the chances are being so slim that you'd have a sibling match. And then when we turned out that Annika was the perfect match in all the numbers, so thankful, because if it was not for Annika, my Karina would not get a second chance and get the extra years that she got.
Their motto was one mind, one marrow.
One mind, one marrow.
Despite the improvements we've made, most of those improvements have been supportive care, basically getting people through the transplant, handling infections. But relapse remains the most critical obstacle to transplantation and the main reason that people fail.
I wish we were celebrating her victory in conquering cancer.
Probably the worst part of the job is when things don't work and someone, succumbs to the illness.
In our case, we lost the battle in 2010, April 26th.
What we do is fairly black and white. We want people to be cured, and when things don't go well, it's a real loss for everyone. But it just means that you've got a lot more work to do. Basically, that's what it means, is you have to pull yourselves up, and there's obviously a lot of things that we can't do yet, and it's basically, back to the grind.
And in some ways, it's really healing to use our pain to help others we don't even know. We want to spare them the grief of losing a wonderful child.
I think if my sister were here today, she would be all about having others give back to Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. The blessing and impact it made on her life was immeasurable. You can't replace that. And the 3 extra years that she got from her transplant are something that you can't put a value on.
My daughter got 3 amazing, perfect years, no complications, nothing, having that transplant that I could never trade. 3 extra years of my daughter's life. I got to see my daughter graduate from high school on time with all of her friends. I got to take her to college, a mother's dream. I got to do all the things and raise my girl till she was 19, till she gets out of the house. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without a transplant.
I was alone at the time, and so I took myself to the emergency room, and the emergency room physician could not find a blood clot. And so she said, we need to look a little bit further. And then she found that I had a gut full of tumors. And she said, you have cancer.
When Patricia developed mantle cell lymphoma, I got to know her and her husband through my role as a physician and a researcher.
I believe I'm alive today because of the research that has been done in the past, the clinical trials that have been done, and people who have funded that research. I was very fortunate in that Sabina, my stem cell donor who lives in Germany, was a match for me. And 4 years ago, she donated her stem cells, and I've been cancer-free ever since.
She gave of herself so someone else that she didn't know might live.
She feels like my sister. She feels like a relative somehow. I have her inside of me and in my heart. I'm very grateful.
What's really good about Dr. Press's work is that it's one of the major pathways to applying a method of controlling cancers using the body's own immune system.
Immunotherapy has already had an enormous impact on improving the outcomes of patients with lymphomas, and its prospects for the future are even brighter.
10, 20 years from now, we might look back and say, wow, that was such a nice breakthrough. Things are completely different now.
Knowing that we are approaching 1 million transplants is incredible.
I think it's incredibly important that we continue to fund the amazing work that's done here at the Hutch.
Because we have all these therapies that are attainable right now.
But funding for cancer from the federal government is flat, and actually in real dollars is declining.
You can fund a grant, and it happens right now.
Instead of getting things out in 5 years, it would be half the time to a third of the time, but it's really limited by the dollars.
They are not giving money to an institution, they are giving money to a hope.
It's about a child, it's about a mother, a father, a grandfather.
You know, you save a life and you save the world. From that person's point of view, you did. That's the whole world is them.
Let's make it happen tonight.
Right.
You too?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.